The heavy iron gates of the Ouagadougou military tribunal have just swung open, and the sound echoing through the halls isn't just the footsteps of guards. It is the sound of an old world crumbling. Paul-Henri Damiba, the man who once held the fate of Burkina Faso in his gloved hands, now stands in the harsh light of accountability, stripped of his medals and his mystery. This isn't a mere trial. It is a public dissection of a system designed to keep a nation in chains. Could the justice we witness today be the very spark that finally liberates the bank accounts and the souls of every African across the globe? We must ask ourselves, if the truth behind these shadow files is fully revealed, will the stability of the US dollar and the Western financial empire find itself on the brink of collapse? This is no longer a local headline. It is a global reckoning against the ghosts of colonialism that have haunted our soil for far too long. Ibrahim Traoré is not just a leader. He is the architect of a new Africa that no longer asks for permission to exist. If your heart beats for the freedom of the Sahel and the dignity of our ancestors, hit the like button and subscribe to stand with this revolution. Before we dive into the heart of this conspiracy, let the world know where you are watching from. Leave a comment below with your city. Let the oppressors see that the African diaspora is awake, united, and stronger than ever. To understand why this trial is shaking the foundations of global power, we have to step away from the polished halls of diplomacy and walk down a narrow, sun-scorched path in a village just outside of Kaya. There, and under the shade of a weary baobab tree, sits a man named Amadou. He is 68 years old, and his face is a map of the Sahel itself, etched with deep lines from decades of working a land that often asks for more than it gives. For nearly 50 years, Amadou has woken up before the sun to till the soil, his back bent under the weight of a poverty that felt as permanent as the horizon. Amadou is a man of few words, but he remembers everything. He remembers the grand promises made by men in suits who spoke perfect French. He remembers the military parades where generals like Paul-Henri Damiba stood tall, draped in medals that they had earned in air-conditioned offices, while the sons of the poor were sent to the front lines with empty bellies. For decades, Amadou was told that the reason his village had no clean water and his grandchildren had no books was because of global market fluctuations or a bad rainy season. He was told to be patient, to wait for the trickle-down of foreign aid that never quite reached his dusty doorstep. But today, something is different. Amadou isn't looking at the sky praying for rain. He is leaning forward, his eyes fixed on a small, flickering television screen powered by a single solar panel. He is watching a man who once seemed like a god, General Damiba, sitting in a plain wooden chair, answering to the people. For the first time in his life, Amadou feels a sensation that is more precious than gold. He feels dignity. He realizes that his struggle wasn't an accident of fate. It was a calculation. So it was a choice made by leaders who decided that their secret bank accounts in Switzerland were more important than the lives of men like him. This is the human face of Ibrahim Traoré's revolution. It is not just about changing a flag or a name on a building. It is about the soul of a nation finally demanding an itemized receipt for its suffering. For our diaspora family watching in places like Atlanta, Chicago, or London, I want you to look at Amadou and see your own grandfathers. Think about the elders in your family who worked 2 or 3 jobs in a foreign land, sending every spare dollar back home to a system that seemed to swallow hope whole. How many times have we seen the wealth of our continent vanish into thin air while our people are told to pray for better days? When you see Damiba standing before a judge, you aren't just seeing a legal proceeding, you are seeing the end of an era where the African elite could sell the future of their children for a comfortable retirement in Paris. You are seeing the moment where the fear that has paralyzed our elders for generations is finally being buried. This is why the Western powers are so deeply unsettled. They are not just losing a political ally in Damiba. They are losing the ability to keep people like Amadou in the dark. As long as the people believed their poverty was inevitable, the system was safe. But now, the curtain has been pulled back. Ibrahim Traoré has shown that the resources are there, the wealth is there, and the intelligence is there. The only thing that was missing was a leader with the courage to tell the truth. Imagine the power of that realization. It is if a 68-year-old farmer in a rural village can see through the lies of a global financial empire, then the game is truly over. The price of silence has become too high. As we look into the shadow files being presented in that courtroom, we are looking at the blueprints of our own liberation. We are seeing exactly how the chains were forged, and more importantly, we are learning how to break them. The air inside the military tribunal in Ouagadougou grows heavy as the prosecutor reaches for a nondescript blue folder. To a casual observer, it might look like just another piece of legal paperwork, another stack of bureaucracy. But for the intelligence agencies watching via satellite from Paris, Washington, and Abidjan, that folder is a nuclear option. These are the shadow files, the documented DNA of a betrayal so deep it makes the skin crawl. This isn't just about a failed presidency. It is about the cold, calculated sale of a nation's soul. Let's be honest about who Paul-Henri Damiba really was. When he took power in January 2022, he didn't come as a liberator. He came as a caretaker for a dying system. While the people of northern Burkina Faso were being hunted like animals by insurgents, the halls of the presidential palace were filled with the whispers of backroom deals. The intelligence reports now surfacing suggest that Damiba wasn't just struggling to stop the violence. He was allegedly managing the crisis in a way that kept the old colonial structures profitable. He was a middleman, a gatekeeper who ensured that the flow of gold continued to reach foreign banks even as the soil of the motherland was soaked in the blood of its children. The story of his extradition from Togo reads like a high-stakes political thriller that would make a Hollywood scriptwriter blush. For months, Togo had been turned into a sanctuary for the fallen leader, a place where the secrets of the old guard were kept under lock and key. Ibrahim Traoré knew that as long as Damiba remained free in a neighboring capital, the ghost of the old regime would haunt every reform he tried to implement. The pressure on Togo was immense. Regional powers, acting as proxies for European interests, were desperately trying to block the transfer. Why were they so terrified? Because they knew that if Damiba was forced to speak in a court of law, he wouldn't just be talking about his own mistakes. He would be exposing a network of complicity that stretches across borders and oceans. But Ibrahim Traoré is not a man who accepts no as an answer when it comes to the sovereignty of his people. He didn't want a quiet deal. He didn't want a private confession. He demanded a televised trial. This was a masterstroke of psychological warfare against the corrupt elite. In the past, when an African leader fell, they were either quietly exiled to a villa in the south of France or dealt with in the dark of night. That secrecy allowed the rot to stay in the wood. It allowed the same corrupt officials to simply change their ties and serve the next foreign master. By bringing the cameras into that courtroom, Traoré has turned the legal system into a classroom for the entire world. Inside those shadow files are the names of consultants, lobbyists, and security firms that operate in the gray zone between private business and state-sponsored destabilization. The records don't just show money moving. They show where it arrived. We are looking at a system of shadow banking where the sweat of the African laborer is converted into the luxury of a private estate in Europe. One of the most explosive pieces of evidence involves encrypted messages intercepted by Burkina intelligence in late 2025. These weren't military orders. They were political blueprints. They reveal a coordinated effort by regional leaders, men who call themselves brothers of the Burkina people, to deliberately keep the Sahel in a state of chaos. Why would they do this? Because a stable, sovereign, and self-sufficient Burkina Faso is the greatest threat to their own survival. If Ibrahim Traoré succeeds in building a nation that doesn't need to beg for French aid or American security assistance, then the youth in Ivory Coast, Senegal, and Nigeria will start asking the most dangerous question in the world: why can't we do the same? The conspiracy being unraveled in this trial is an attempt to kill an idea before it can spread. To our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, understand that this betrayal is personal. Every time you send a remittance home to help a sick relative or pay for a school fee, You were fighting against a headwind created by men like Damiba. They were the ones ensuring that the system stayed broken so that the dependency would never end. But the lights are on now. The shadow files are being read aloud. And for the first time in 60 years, the untouchables are looking very touchable. The fear that once lived in the hearts of the people has moved into the palaces of the traitors. As the trial moves deeper into the financial evidence, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifts from political drama to a forensic investigation of a crime scene. This is where we find the smoking gun that connects the dusty streets of Ouagadougou to the high-rise glass towers of global finance. We are talking about the mechanics of shadow banking, a system designed to be invisible to the average citizen but crystal clear to those who profit from African instability. One of the most damning revelations currently emerging involves a specific transaction of $125,000. Now, to a billionaire in New York or a high-ranking official in Brussels. This might seem like pocket change, but in the context of the Sahel, $125,000 is a lethal weapon. Intelligence sources and the documents presented in the trial suggest that this sum was allegedly moved through a series of offshore conduits, specifically to fund a destabilization campaign against Ibrahim Traoré's administration. This wasn't money for roads or clinics. It was a down payment on a civil war. The documents point toward a twisted trail of informal cash networks. Imagine a system where money doesn't move through standard wire transfers that can be tracked by international monitors. Instead, it moves through the shadows, layered through shell companies and consultancy fees, paid to intermediaries who have no real offices. The trial is exposing how these funds were used to hire mercenaries, buy off border guards, and, perhaps most sinister of all, fund a massive digital propaganda campaign. They wanted to flood the internet with lies, trying to convince the world and the Burkina people that Traoré was leading them toward ruin. But why would anyone go to such lengths for such a relatively small amount of money? The answer lies in the Ivorian dimension. For decades, Abidjan has served as the financial lungs of the old colonial order in West Africa. It is the heart of the CFA franc system, a currency that acts as an umbilical cord tied directly to the French treasury. Under this system, African nations were forced to deposit a staggering 50% of their foreign exchange reserves into a foreign central bank. Think about the sheer audacity of that. While our people were struggling to find electricity for their schools, as our own national wealth was being used to prop up the euro. Ibrahim Traoré is the first leader in a generation to look at this arrangement and say, no more. By nationalizing assets and demanding that African gold stays in African vaults, he has declared war on the economic hegemony of the West. The $125,000 smoking gun is proof that the old guard is willing to pay any price to protect that umbilical cord. They know that if the CFA franc collapses in Burkina Faso, the entire financial empire across West Africa will follow like a house of cards. The trial is revealing a network of comprador elites, local players who acted as the eyes and ears for foreign interests. These are the people who took their cut of the $125,000 while their brothers and sisters suffered. The digital recordings played in the courtroom are chilling. You can hear the casual tone in which these co-conspirators discuss the potential neutralization of a sitting president, as if they were discussing a business merger. They spoke of the Burkina people as assets to be managed or obstacles to be removed. This is the reality of the global conspiracy. It is not a theory. It is a ledger book. It is the realization that the poverty we see across our continent is not a natural state. It is an engineered outcome. To our diaspora family, when you hear these numbers, remember that this is why your hard-earned money never seems to be enough to fix the problems back home. You are pouring water into a bucket that has been intentionally riddled with holes by men like Damiba and his handlers. But the shadow files have been opened. The light of transparency is acting like a disinfectant. By showing the world exactly how the money moved, Ibrahim Traoré is doing more than just prosecuting a former general. He is educating an entire continent on how to spot the strings of the puppet masters. The fear you see in the eyes of the co-conspirators is not just fear of prison, it is the fear of being irrelevant. Once the people understand the game is over. While the courtroom in Ouagadougou focuses on the legal guilt of individuals, the real war is being fought on the ledger books of the world's central banks. To understand the magnitude of what is happening, we have to talk about the US dollar and its grip on the world. For decades, the dollar has maintained its status as the world's reserve currency, not just through military might, but because global commodities, especially African gold and oil, were required to be traded in greenbacks. When you have to buy dollars to buy your own resources, you are paying a tax to a foreign power before you even begin to build your own country. Ibrahim Traoré looked at this system and decided it was time to tear up the script. In early 2026, the world was stunned when Burkina Faso announced it had effectively cleared a massive portion of its external debt. For a landlocked nation in the middle of a conflict zone, this seemed impossible. But the answer lies in Traoré's new gold doctrine. He has fundamentally rewritten the rules of extraction. He replaced the old colonial model of dig and export with a sovereign mandate: refine at home, back our own currency. By establishing a national gold refinery, the Traoré has effectively cut out the middlemen who were taking a massive cut of the profit. But he didn't stop there. He is using the physical gold bars, real, tangible wealth, to build a reserve that doesn't depend on the whims of the Federal Reserve in Washington or the Treasury in Paris. This is the birth of the AES currency, a regional currency backed by the very soil under our feet. Think about the strategic implications of this move for a second. If Africa stops using the dollar for its internal trade and begins using a gold-backed currency, the demand for the US dollar drops. When demand drops, the value of that currency in the West could fluctuate, affecting everything from the price of gas to the stability of pensions in America. This is why the televised trial of Damiba is being watched with such intensity in the halls of power. It is a test case. Can a sovereign African economic model survive if it dares to question the hegemony of the dollar? Traoré is also playing a long game with education as his cornerstone. He has launched an ambitious policy of free education from primary school all the way to the university level. This isn't just a political gift to get votes. It's a strategic investment in the economic shield. By removing financial barriers to knowledge, he is building a generation of Burkina engineers, geologists, and financial analysts who can manage the complex refineries and high-tech industries he is bringing to the Sahel. To our diaspora community, this is where the story hits home. For years, the narrative was that Africa was too poor to educate its children without foreign aid. Traoré has proven that Africa was never poor. It was just being robbed. When a young African child no longer has to choose between a textbook and a meal, the entire trajectory of the continent changes. We are witnessing the shift from exporting raw minerals to exporting African intelligence. However, the old guard is not going away quietly. They are fighting back with the only weapons they have left: misinformation and economic sabotage. In late January 2026, we saw coordinated speculative attacks on the financial stability of the Sahel states. The enemies of sovereignty want the world to believe that Africa is too unstable to manage its own money. They want to create panic so that investors flee and the local markets collapse. But the trial in Ouagadougou serves as the ultimate counter-narrative, as by showing that the government is willing to prosecute its own former leaders for financial corruption, Traoré is creating something more valuable than gold: institutional confidence. He is showing that in the new Africa, the law applies to everyone, from the street sweeper to the general. This transparency is what will attract the right kind of partners who want to build, not just extract. We must understand that this economic warfare is a battle for the soul of our future. It is a choice between being permanent debtors to a system that hates us or being the masters of our own wealth. Ibrahim Traoré's economic shield is not just for Burkina Faso, it is a blueprint for the entire continent. The era of begging for crumbs from the table of the global dollar is over. The era of owning the table has begun. As the testimony from the shadow files continues to leak into the public domain, a cold wind of anxiety is blowing through the ornate presidential palaces of West Africa. The silence coming from the neighboring capitals isn't a sign of peace. It is the silence of sheer, unadulterated terror. Intelligence reports suggest that since the beginning of the Damiba trial in early 2026, a series of frantic, late-night phone calls have been exchanged between Abidjan, Abuja, and Accra. The topic of these conversations is never about the guilt or innocence of Paul-Henri Damiba. They don't care about him. What they care about is the Traoré infection. To the old guard, the transparency being practiced in Ouagadougou is a virus, and if it spreads, it will consume the carefully guarded secrets that have kept them in power for decades. Let's look at the panic in Abuja, Nigeria. President Bola Tinubu's administration is currently attempting to manage a nation grappling with triple-digit inflation and a crashing naira, but their eyes are fixed firmly on the north. Why? Because the youth of Nigeria are looking at Ibrahim Traoré with a sense of longing. They see a 37-year-old leader in camouflage doing what their own democratic leaders have failed to do for 60 years, provide a sense of dignity and a vision for the future. When Nigerian activists were recently arrested for simply showing solidarity with Burkina Faso, it wasn't about maintaining public order. It was about preventing the Nigerian people from asking the most dangerous question in West African politics. If Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation with no oil and no coastline, can provide free university education and refine its own gold, why are we still begging for IMF loans and struggling with a crumbling power grid? In the Ivory Coast, the stakes are even higher, and the fear is even more palpable. The Damiba trial has directly implicated elements within the Abidjan administration as the financiers of recent assassination plots against Traoré. Imagine the fallout if the full financial records are read aloud in open court. If it is proven that cocoa money, wealth meant for the Ivorian farmer, was diverted to fund mercenaries to kill a neighboring president, the legitimacy of the entire Ivorian state could collapse overnight. This is why Alassane Ouattara's government has been so desperate to portray Traoré as a puppet of foreign powers. And they need to keep the world's attention on global geopolitics so that no one looks too closely at the local bank transfers. The trial is also exposing the hollow shell of regional bodies like ECOWAS. For decades, these organizations were marketed to the world as symbols of African unity. But the shadow files reveal a darker reality. They show how these organizations were weaponized as proxies for foreign interests. When ECOWAS imposes sanctions on a nation like Burkina Faso, they aren't just punishing a junta. They are attempting to starve a population into submission to protect the flow of resources to the West. This is a masterclass in modern neo-colonialism, using African faces to implement European policies. It ensures that the blame stays within the family while the profits leave the continent. But the dominoes are starting to fall. The borders drawn by Europeans in 1884 to divide us are being rendered irrelevant by the shared aspiration for sovereignty. To our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, understand the magnitude of this shift. When a young man in a Lagos slum or a marketplace in Accra cheers for Ibrahim Traoré, he isn't being manipulated by propaganda. He has finally found a mirror that reflects his own potential. The panic of the neighboring presidents is the final proof that the Traoré model works. If it were failing, they would ignore it. The fact that they are spending millions of dollars to destabilize it proves that transparency is the most powerful weapon in the African arsenal. The shocking names being whispered in the corridors of power are not just individuals. They are an entire class, the comprador class. These are the gatekeepers who sold our children's future for a seat at the table in Paris. But the lights are on now, and the shadows have nowhere to hide. The Traoré infection is spreading, and it is carrying the cure for 60 years of manufactured poverty. As the final witnesses step down and the shadow files are entered into the permanent record, we are witnessing more than just the end of a trial. We are witnessing the birth of a new political morality. For decades, the global narrative about African leadership was one of strongmen or puppets. You were either a dictator who ruled by fear or a technocrat who ruled by the permission of foreign banks. Ibrahim Traoré has shattered that binary by introducing a third way, the rule of the institution, as the greatest victory in this courtroom is not the potential sentence given to Paul-Henri Damiba. It is the fact that the law in Burkina Faso has proven to be superior to the ego of any individual, regardless of their rank or their foreign connections. This is the new standard. Traoré is teaching a masterclass to the entire world on how to build institutional confidence. When the people see a government that is willing to air its own dirty laundry and hold its former leaders accountable under the full glare of the public eye, they no longer feel like subjects. They feel like shareholders. This standard is what terrifies the old world order. They relied on the opacity of African governance to hide their exploitation. They needed backroom deals because the light of day would have made their contracts illegal. By choosing transparency, Traoré has made corruption uncomfortable again. He has shown that sovereignty and transparency are not contradictions. They are the two sides of the same coin of freedom. To our diaspora family, this is the standard we must now demand from every corner of the continent. We must no longer accept stability as an excuse for silence. We must no longer accept complexity as an excuse for theft. The trial in Ouagadougou has proven that the truth is simple. A nation belongs to its people, and its wealth should serve their children. As we look toward the final verdict, we aren't just looking at the fate of one man. We are looking at the blueprint for a continent that has finally decided to stop looking at the ground. The Sankara spirit has been modernized for the 21st century, not just with rhetoric, but with a transparent legal system and a gold-backed economy. The new Africa isn't a dream we are waiting for. It is a reality that is being broadcast live to the world. The era of the untouchables is officially over. As the gavel prepares to fall in the heart of Ouagadougou, the echoes are not merely fading. They are vibrating through the corridors of power from Paris to Washington. This trial has been more than a legal conclusion. It is a prophecy. The future of West Africa is no longer being written in the secret rooms of foreign embassies or in the whispering hallways of colonial ministries. It is being written in the open courtrooms of a sovereign people who have finally reclaimed their voice. Ibrahim Traoré has not just prosecuted a man named Damiba. He has prosecuted the very idea that Africa can be bought, sold, or silenced. Now, he has put on trial the system that for 60 years traded our dignity for foreign bank accounts and our security for empty promises. The shadow files have been laid bare, and the world now knows that the poverty of the Sahel was never a lack of resources, but a surplus of betrayal. We predict that in the coming months, the revelations from this courtroom will trigger a spring of accountability across the continent. The names exposed in those folders will haunt those who thought they were untouchable. But more importantly, the example of Burkina Faso will serve as a lighthouse for every African nation currently drifting in the fog of neo-colonialism. We are moving toward a multipolar world where the gold of the Sahel, its lithium, and its brilliant, awakened youth will finally serve the people of the Sahel. The choice for other African leaders is now stark and unavoidable. You must either evolve into the Traoré model of transparency and service, or prepare to be swept away by the rising tide of history. You cannot stop an idea whose time has come, especially when that idea is broadcast live for the whole world to see. To my brothers and sisters of the African diaspora, this is our moment to stand. We are the bridge between the struggle at home and the influence abroad. We are the witnesses to this rebirth. If your heart beats with the rhythm of a free and sovereign Africa, if you believe that our leaders should answer to us and only us, then the time for silence is over. Now, let us perform our ritual of solidarity. Let us show the world that our spirit has no borders and our resolve has no end. If you stand with Ibrahim Traoré, thus if you believe in the rise of a new Africa, and if you demand justice for our ancestors and our children, I want you to go to the comments right now. Type, "Amen," if you believe in the vision. Type, "I stand with Africa," if you are ready for the harvest of sovereignty. Let the algorithm see our strength. Let the world know that the African lion is no longer sleeping. It is leading. The courtroom in Ouagadougou was just the classroom. The real transformation happens in your heart and in our collective action. Stand tall, stay vigilant, and remember, transparency is not a weakness. It is the ultimate strength. Africa is rising, and this time, the whole world is watching.